Hey guys, today I'm going to be doing a book review on Three Sisters, Three Queens by Philippa Gregory. Three Sisters, Three Queens by Philippa Gregory follows the sister of King Henry VIII, Margaret Tudor, as she becomes the Queen of Scotland, raising the next heir to the throne. Henry's ever-changing mercurial moods become a problem, and more than ever, Margaret has to trust and rely on the support of her sister-in-law, Catherine of Aragon, and her sister, Mary. Yeah, guys, as much as I love Philippa Gregory, I ended up being a tiny bit frustrated with this book, and it might honestly just be a me problem because I think I went into this book expecting certain things and I didn't end up getting those particular things, I suppose, so it might kind of really be a me problem. Here's the thing. For some stupid, random, weird reason, I was under the impression that this book was gonna have, like, multiple narrators. Like I said, from the plot synopsis, we're following the sister of Henry VIII, his oldest sister, Margaret. And Henry VIII also had another sister, Mary, and then, of course, his very first wife was Catherine of Aragon. So, for some reason, like I said, I don't know how I got into this impression, but I thought the narrative was going to be split up between the three women. If not necessarily Catherine of Aragon, since, I mean, we already had a whole book with her, The Constant Princess. If she didn't necessarily have a plot line, that didn't bother me because we had a whole book with her, like I said. But I really genuinely thought that this book was going to be divided up, like back and forth point of view chapters, between both of Henry's sisters, Margaret and Mary. And it reached like 100 pages in this book, and I realized I was still in the point of view of Margaret, and I was like, wait a minute, where's Mary? And and again, that's when it kind of occurred to me that this book is not going to have split narrators, split point of views at all. The whole book is Margaret Tudor's point of view. And that's not a bad thing, because the thing is, Margaret definitely has been neglected to history. She's one of those kind of forgotten women of history. A lot of times she is merely referenced as being only the sister of Henry VIII. So I'm really super glad Margaret did get a whole book, because I'm trying to think, are there other historical fiction books out there that are focused on her? If there are, there's not very many. There's probably just a small little handful. So I'm super glad and excited she got a whole book to herself. But again, like I said, I was under the impression it was going to be divided up between her and her sister Mary, and that's what I was hoping and expecting. I really wanted to see a book giving both of the sisters a voice and a time to shine and to show their stories, because both of their stories are super fascinating and super intriguing. And Margaret's story, I love and adore Margaret's story because there's so much that happens in her narrative, but this book is kind of giant. It's a big, huge, giant book, and I think it reaches a point that the book does start to feel its length, unfortunately, and certain things kind of reach a point that they feel a little bit repetitive and monotonous. Like Margaret is kind of going through some similar issues and problems that just kind of keep repeating over and over, especially with like her second husband, for instance. I almost feel like a lot of the narrative and plot with her second husband could have been condensed a little bit to kind of keep it from getting super repetitive, you know what I mean? So I really, really wish this book would have been divided up between the two sisters, and yeah, keep it the same length, or maybe even a little longer, but yeah, weave in Mary's story in there too, because Mary had a fascinating story in her own right, because she ended up marrying the King of France, like very briefly, you guys, and then he died, and then she went right on back and illegally married Charles Brandon, who was a friend of her brother, Henry VIII. And yeah, the two of them kind of have this tragic downfall, in a sense, the way Henry treats his own sister and his best friend. But they managed to make it out alive, you know. So I was super excited. I was like, oh, I love the story of Mary and Charles Brandon. I can't wait to get to that. And then, yeah, like I said, it reached like 100 pages into this book, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm still in the point of view of Margaret. Where's Mary and Charles Brandon? I'm here for that romance. So that's what I'm saying. I'm frustrated with this book a little bit, but again, I think it's really just more of a me problem, that I went into it expecting certain things, and there's certain things didn't happen. But again, I love Margaret's story just as much, so I'm not complaining about that. You know, I'm not complaining on it being about Margaret. I'm just kind of complaining, like, I wish Mary would have been there too. To some degree, we do get Mary's story. Mary is a kind of a central character in a sense, but what was also kind of frustrating and irritating with this book, I feel like Philippa Gregory does a lot of she does a lot of telling certain plot points, but she doesn't really show a lot of those plot points. You know, the whole show don't tell aspect when you're writing. You always hear that when if you have like a creative writing teacher, they're always like, you need to show, not tell. And I think that book was kind of suffering from that. It was telling rather than showing. And a lot of times the communication going on between Margaret and Mary, where Mary would be updating Margaret on things going down in England, and, you know, the ever-changing winds of England, and the mercurial moods of Henry, you know. A lot of what the communication is between Mary and Margaret, and then also even Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, a lot of the communication is done through letters. Obviously, there's a constant wave and flow of letters being written between all three of these women. So you spend a lot of time reading letters, which can almost get a little boring sometimes. And that's how you're learning what is happening with, like, Catherine and Mary in the meantime. Margaret is getting a lot of that information through just simply letters, her reading a letter, or somebody else reading a letter to her, you know, and yeah, her just kind of sitting there and listening to it or reading it, and then, yeah, kind of expressing her opinion on that matter, you know, and that's kind of the extent of it. So again, there's a lot of kind of telling the narrative through these letters, but I would have preferred to have seen all of that played out and acted out. You know, I would have preferred to see the drama in England, what's going on between Catherine and Henry, what's going on between Mary and France, and then, yeah, her husband, the king, dies, and then she marries Charles Brandon, and yeah, she strikes the ire of her brother, you know. I would prefer to have physically seen all of that, rather than Margaret reading about it through a letter, you know. So I think the structure of this book could have been handled differently, in a manner that I would have preferred, quite honestly. So let me review the actual book. Now that I got what I didn't like about it particularly, let me review the actual book. Margaret as a character, as a real historical character, there's not really a hell of a lot known about Margaret. Again, she's one of those neglected women of history, and we don't really have a lot to go off of to base off anything. So Philippa Gregory has a lot of work to do in this book and flesh out who she think Margaret could have possibly been. And here's the thing with Margaret. On Goodreads, there's a lot of people who just did not like Margaret's point of view at all in this book. They found Margaret to be really annoying and irritating and selfish and obnoxious. And that's kind of just it. Margaret is every bit of those things in this book. And I kind of ended up loving the book because of that. In a lot of Philippa Gregory's other historical fiction books, a lot of times the women, they do have their flaws and their they have their flaws and their vulnerabilities and their strengths and weaknesses, you know. And the thing is, a lot of times the women are still kind of super perfect, almost, you know. So I kind of liked in this book that Philippa Gregory has a female protagonist, who is kind of rather unlikable. Because I think in all the other books, your main female protagonist is for the most part pretty likable, you know. Even when there are things that are annoying and obnoxious about the characters, it's like they still rise up above those things and you still love them and appreciate them by the end. So yeah, Margaret, the thing with Margaret, for this whole book, she can be irritating and obsessed and obnoxious, and she has a lot of privilege. She comes from the Tudor dynasty that just is, it's brand new. She thinks really highly of herself and of her family. She looks down on a lot of people sometimes. So I really loved that Philippa Gregory had a female protagonist in this book. She is nowhere near perfect at all. She is definitely incredibly flawed. She has a lot of issues that she has to kind of work through this book, and it's kind of the thing, does she ever really kind of learn? Does she ever really kind of learn how irritating she can be? It's like she sort of does, but not really. So I love the Margaret that was presented in this book, because we were introduced to her at a very young age, and she thinks really highly of herself and her family and this dynasty that they're creating, and yeah, she believes really deeply in the thing of, yeah, I'm a young woman, marry me off. I want to enhance and stabilize our family through a power marriage. She totally knows that, and she's willing and totally into it to do that. Whereas in a lot of historical fiction books like this, the young women, they don't want to get married. They don't want to get married, and they don't want to help stabilize the position of their family. But yeah, Margaret is all about that. She is all about stabilizing the Tudor dynasty. So yeah, she just is like, yeah, hell yes, I'll marry the King of Scotland. I'll definitely produce some heirs for him. So yeah, that's the bulk of this book. It's her going to Scotland, being married to King James, and then kind of get into all of that with his death at the Battle of Flodden, which she puts a lot of blame on Catherine of Aragon for that. And then yes, she marries her second husband, which it starts off promising, but then goes super downhill with their marriage. I didn't know a lot about their marriage, so I found a lot of that super intriguing and just like, dear Lord, did all this really happen? And yeah, some of the research I did, a lot of it really did happen. They really did have a really tense relationship and marriage with one another. So I did. I love the journey of Margaret, and yeah, her different husbands that she goes through, and yeah, everything she's doing for her children and for the heir to Scotland, because yeah, she wants to be Queen Regent. Pretty early on in this book, once King James dies at the Battle of Flodden, her son is only a few years old, and she really wants to be Queen Regent and rule in his stead and help him grow and mature into the role. But of course, her being a woman, all of the men are like, no. If this sounds like the latest season of House of the Dragon, you would be correct. Margaret kind of turns into the Alicent Hightower of this book, and I was all here for it. And another thing, Catherine of Aragon, again, she had her own book with the Constant Princess, and she was obviously the heroine of that book. But in this book, just wildly enough, Catherine is more the villain to a degree. She is Margaret's nemesis. Even though Catherine is Margaret's sister-in-law, and they should be on the side of each other, two women supporting each other because of the men trying to control them and manipulate them. The thing is, Margaret has a lot of spite and jealousy towards Catherine, her sister-in-law, which is so fascinating. And there's moments that she does love Catherine as a sister-in-law, and she is there to support her, but then other moments where her vanity and her jealousy get the best of her, and she can't stand Catherine. And again, the whole battle at Flodden, where King James dies, and then Margaret puts a lot of that blame on Catherine for that whole thing. And yeah, that's where it really shifts, and Margaret sees Catherine as her nemesis and her enemy. So I love that whole dynamic, seeing Catherine in that different light as not the protagonist of this story. And at the end of the day, what this book is truly about, it's about all three of these women, even though it is told completely from the point of view of Margaret. The thing is, again, you're getting those letters, and you're getting a lot of what's going on with Catherine. You're getting a lot of what's going on with Mary. This book at its core is about these three women who are the two are sisters by birth, and then Catherine of Aragon being a sister-in-law, so a sister kind of coming into that. It's about three women, three sisters, three queens who are in this really male-dominated society and world, and they're just trying to make a name for themselves and be more, have a voice. Dealing with the whole thing that a lot of times when they get upset, or if they are getting ambitious, if they're strategizing, the thing is, all the men around them, they start seeing them as either whores, or they're overly ambitious, or they're irrational. You know, their behavior is irrational. But the thing is, in the meantime, the men are doing the exact same thing, but the women are not allowed to do those things. You know, they're not allowed to be ambitious and power hungry and strategists and all that, you know. So I love that whole dynamic of this book as well, what Margaret Berry and Catherine have to deal with. So, in conclusion with this book is still fine. I'm still really glad I read this book. I still really highly enjoyed it. Probably not as much as some of Philippa Gregory's other books, but I did still enjoy it. I love the point of view of Margaret. I felt like I was learning a lot about her, yeah, guys. And I just really kind of fell for her as the heroine of this story. Just really complex and flawed. She was great. So yeah, I definitely recommend this book if you've read Philippa Gregory in the past, if you want to learn more about Margaret Tudor, if you don't know a lot about her. Yeah, just be warned, this book does not have split narratives like I was assuming. Mary's kind of there in the background doing her own thing, and you just hear about a lot of what's going down through letters, which is a little unfortunate. So you guys, that is it for my thoughts and feelings on Three Sisters, Three Queens. In the comments below, if you guys read this book, just let me know. That's it for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this video, you may like these other videos. Bye, guys.